The quiet collapse of trust. The quiet collapse of trust. A lot of people say they don't trust anything anymore. They don't trust the news. They don't trust institutions. They don't trust experts. They don't trust leaders. They don't even trust one another the way they used to. Most people think this means society has become cynical, that people have grown bitter, that everyone is just negative now. But that explanation is too shallow. What's actually happening is something quieter and more serious. Trust didn't disappear because people stopped wanting to believe. It has disappeared because belief kept being punished. For a long time, trust was a reasonable posture. You could assume that words roughly matched reality, that promises carried weight. What's actually happening is something quieter and more serious. Trust didn't disappear because people stopped wanting to believe. It disappeared because belief kept being punished. For a long time, trust was a reasonable posture. You could assume that words roughly matched, that promises carried weight, that authority implied responsibility, not perfection, but good faith. Over time, that changed. People were told things were stable, that weren't. They were told plans were solid, that weren't. They were told standards mattered until they didn't. They were told to rely on systems that quietly failed them. Not once, repeatedly. And when trust is broken once, people feel hurt. When it's broken repeatedly, people adapt. They stop leaning. They stop assuming. They stop extending belief without proof. This isn't hostility. It's self-protection. Most people didn't wake up one day and decide to distrust everything. They learned that confidence was often unwarranted, that certainty was often overstated, that reassurance was often premature. So they pulled back. They became cautious, suspicious, guarded, and now distrust feels normal. Not dramatic distrust, quiet distrust, the kind that shows up as hesitation, as skepticism, as distance. People listen, but they don't commit. They hear claims, but they wait for the reversal. They nod, but they don't internalize. This is not a moral failure. It's a rational response to inconsistency. Trust requires stability. It requires continuity. It requires truth over time. When those disappear, distrust fills the gap. This episode is not about blaming. It's about understanding. Because until we understand why trust collapsed, we won't know how to rebuild it. When words stop meaning what they say, trust depends on language. Not eloquent language, reliable language. When people hear words, they instinctively ask a question. What does this actually mean? For a long time, the answer was actually clear. When someone said something was safe, it generally was. When someone said something was temporary, it usually was. When someone said something mattered, it tended to keep mattering. That consistency allowed trust to form. But over time, words began to loosen. They were stretched, reframed, redefined, used strategically rather than truthfully. And when words stop anchoring reality, people lose their footing. They start listening differently. Not for meaning, but for subtext. Not for clarity, but for signals. Not for truth, but for positioning. This is exhausting. because language is supposed to reduce uncertainty, not multiply it. When the same words are used to mean different things in different moments, people stop taking them seriously. Safe becomes conditional. Temporary becomes indefinite. Necessary becomes negotiable. Expert becomes unclear. And once language loses precision, trust begins to erode quietly. People don't argue, they withdraw. They stop asking questions because answers feel unstable. They stop believing explanations because explanations keep changing. This is how skepticism becomes default. Not because people reject truth, but because they no longer know where truth lives. Language used to be a bridge between people. Now it often feels like a barrier. People hear the same sentence and interpret entirely different realities. That fragmentation doesn't just confuse, it isolates, because shared meanings is what allows shared life. When shared meaning disappears, people retreat into private interpretations. They trust their instincts more than words, their experiences more than expectations. Their circle is more than institution. There isn't ignorance, it's adaptation. When language becomes unreliable, people rely on what feels solid, what they can verify, what they can see directly. And that narrowing of trust has consequences. It makes cooperation harder. It makes disagreement dangerous. It makes correction feel like an attack. Because without shared definitions, there is no neutral ground. Everyone is guessing what everyone else means. And guessing breeds suspicion. This is why people now say they don't know who to believe. It's not that truth disappeared. It's that the words meant to carry it lost their weight. Rebuilding trust requires more than better messaging. It requires restraint, consistency, the willingness to let words mean less, but mean it reliable. Until language regains integrity, trust will remain fragile because people cannot place confidence in what keeps shifting. They can only protect themselves. Broken promises and moving goalposts. Trust is built on expectation, not blind faith, expectation. When people commit to something, they do so because they believe the terms will remain recognizable, that effort will lead somewhere, that sacrifice will be honored, that the rules will not quietly change after they've complied. When those expectations are met, trust deepens. When they are violated, trust weakens. But when they are violated repeatedly, trust collapses. This is what many people have experienced. Not one dramatic betrayal, but a series of small ones. Promises made confidently, then revised, then reframed, then forgotten. People were told certain paths would lead to stability. They were told certain behaviors would be rewarded. They were told certain standards mattered. And then the ground shifted. Not openly, quietly. Goals were adjusted. Timelines extended. Definitions changed. And people were expected to adapt without complaint. At first, most did. They assumed the changes were temporary, necessary, made in good faith. But as the adjustments continued, a pattern emerged. Effort no longer guaranteed outcome. Compliance no longer guaranteed fairness. Patience no longer guaranteed resolution. That realization changes people. Not immediately, gradually. They stop planning long term. They stop committing deeply. They stop trusting assurances. They begin waiting for the next revision, the next exception, the next reversal. This isn't rebellion, it's caution. Trust requires a stable horizon, a sense that tomorrow will resemble today in recognizable ways. When the horizon keeps moving, people stop walking towards it. They conserve energy, they hedge, they protect themselves. This is why so many people feel hesitant about commitment now, not just in institutions, but in relationships, careers, communities. They have learned that commitment increases vulnerability in unstable systems, so they stay flexible, detached, ready to pivot. Flexibility is praised as maturity, but chronic flexibility often hides distrust. It's the posture you've taken when you don't believe the ground will hold. And here's the quiet damage. When people stop trusting promises, they stop believing in shared futures. They focus on survival, short-term gains, immediate returns. Long-term projects suffer. Institution weakens. Relationships thin. Civic life erodes. Not because people are selfish, but because betrayal teaches people to protect themselves first. Most people didn't want to become skeptical. They became skeptical because optimism became costly, because believing came with penalties. So they adjusted, they lowered expectations, they stopped trusting projections, they stopped investing emotionally in promises they couldn't verify. This is the soil in which distrust grows, not ideology, experience. And until that experience is acknowledged, calls for trust will fall flat. People cannot be argued back into belief. Trust is not restored by persuasion. It is restored by consistency, by limits, by keeping promises even when it's inconvenient. Until that happens, people will remain guarded, not because they are cynical, but because history taught them to be. Information without authority. Never in history have people had access to more information, and never in history have people felt less certain about what to believe. This isn't a coincidence. Information alone does not create understanding. It requires authority, not authoritarianism. Authority. Authority is what tells you which information matters, which information can be trusted, and which information should be ignored. For most of human history, authority came from continuity, from institutions that endured, from experts who were accountable over time, from traditions that proved reliable across generations. Authority didn't mean perfection, it meant track record, consistency, limits. Now information arrives without that structure. Endless claims, endless studies, endless opinions, contradicting one another in real time, with no shared hierarchy to sort them. So people are forced to become their own arbiters, to evaluate credibility without the tools to do so confidently. This creates cognitive strain, because most people don't want to decide everything themselves. They want to rely on trustworthy systems. When those systems feel unreliable, people don't become informed. They become overwhelmed. They begin to disengage, or they cling to whatever feels certain. This is why extreme claims spread so easily, not because people crave falsehood, but because certainty feels relieving in a sea of ambiguity. When authority collapses, volume replaces credibility, confidence replaces accuracy, speed replaces verification, and people learn that the loudest voice often wins attention regardless of truth. This corrodes trust. Because people can no longer tell whether information is offered in good faith or strategic interest. They begin to ask, who benefits from this? What's being left out? Why does this keep changing? Those are healthy questions. But when every message requires suspicion, people grow very tired. They stop listening. They stop learning. They stop believing anyone has a clear picture. This is how apathy forms. Not from ignorance, from overload. From being asked to process more uncertainty than the human mind was designed to carry. Authority once acted as stabilizing force. It reduced complexity. It filtered noise. It allowed people to trust without constant vigilance. When that function disappears, life becomes mentally exhausting. Every claim feels provisional. Every explanation feels temporary. Every conclusion feels subject to reversal. So people stop committing to what they hear. They keep emotional distance. They remain unconvinced. Not because they reject truth, but because truth no longer arises with weight. Rebuilding authority does not mean silencing disagreement. It means restoring credibility through restraint, through humility, through admitting uncertainty without abandoning responsibility. Authority returns when institutions demonstrate that they can say, we don't know, without losing integrity. When they prioritize accuracy over speed. When they accept limits. Until that happens, people will continue to distrust information, no matter how abundant it is. Because information without authority does not enlighten. It destabilizes. Why cynicism feels safer than hope. When trust collapses, people don't usually become hopeful. They become cautious. And caution over time hardens into cynicism. Cynicism is often misunderstood. It's not hatred, it's not bitterness, it's not even disbelief. Cynicism is a defense. It's what people adopt after belief has hurt them. Hope requires vulnerability. It asks you to lean forward. It invests emotionally. It risks disappointment. Cynicism asks nothing. It keeps distance. It assumes failure in advance. So when failure arrives, it doesn't wound. This is why cynicism feels safe. It lowers the stakes. If you don't expect much, you can't be betrayed. If you don't believe promises, you can't be misled. If you don't trust institutions, you can't be let down by them. Cynicism protects people from repeated disappointment, but it comes at a cost, because cynicism doesn't just block pain, it blocks possibility. When people become cynical, they stop imagining better futures. They stop committing deeply. They stop extending trust, even when it might be warranted. They remain detached, observing rather than participating. This posture feels intelligent, worldly, sophisticated, but over time it hollows people out, because humans are not built to live without hope. Hope is not naivete, it's orientation. It's the belief that effort can lead somewhere meaningful. Without hope, motivation collapses, purpose weakens, energy drains. This is why cynicism eventually turns heavy. It keeps people safe but leaves them stuck. They criticize easily but build reluctantly. They see flaws quickly but struggle to imagine repair. Cynicism becomes a habit, a lens through which everything is viewed. And once that lens settles, trust feels dangerous. Optimism feels foolish. Belief feels irresponsible. People tell themselves they're being realistic, but often they're being protective. And here's the quiet truth. Most cynicism began as hope. Hope that was disappointed. Hope that was exploited. Hope that was left unsupported. People didn't abandon hope because they didn't need it. They abandoned it because it hurt too much to keep. Understanding this matters because cynicism is not defeated by argument. It is softened by consistency, by honesty, by experiences that slowly restore confidence. No one lectures their way out of cynicism. They emerge from it when trust becomes reasonable again, when promises are kept, when limits are acknowledged, when reality stabilizes. Until then, cynicism will remain attractive, not because people love it, but because it feels safer than being hopeful in a world that keeps disappointing. What trust actually requires? Trust is not a feeling, it's a judgment formed over time based on experience. This is where a lot of conversations go wrong. People talk about trust as if it's something you demand or something you deserve by position alone. But trust doesn't work that way. Trust must be earned, and once broken, it must be re-earned. Slowly, deliberately. Trust requires consistency, not intensity, not enthusiasm. Consistency. Doing the same honest thing over and over without changing the rules. Trust requires limits, the willingness to say what you cannot do, what you do not know, what you will not promise. People trust restraint more than confidence because restraint signals seriousness. Trust requires accountability, not perfection, but ownership. When mistakes are made, they must be named, explained, corrected, without deflection, without excuses. Trust requires continuity. The same standards applied over time, not adjusted when convenient, not suspended when uncomfortable. Continuity tells people what to expect, and expectation is the foundation of trust. Trust also requires humility, the recognition that authority is borrowed, that credibility depends on ongoing behavior, that certainty must be proportional to evidence. Humility doesn't weaken trust, it strengthens it because it signals good faith. This is why trust cannot be rebuilt through persuasion or messaging or reassurance alone. People don't want to be convinced. They want to see reliability. They want to observe patterns. They want to test claims against reality. Trust returns when promises are kept small and fulfilled consistently. When words match actions, when reversals are rare and explained, when authority feels accountable rather than insulated. This is slow work. It does not trend. It does not generate applause. It requires patience. But there is no shortcut. Trying to rush trust only deepens suspicion. This applies everywhere, in institutions, in relationships, in leadership, in everyday life. Trust is built the same way it always has been, by showing up, by telling the truth when it's inconvenient, by keeping commitment even when it costs something, by accepting limits instead of hiding them. People are not asking for perfection. They're asking for coherence, for stability, for a sense that reality will not keep shifting beneath their feet. Until that is restored, distrust will remain, not as rebellion, but as protection. Understanding this changes the conversation. It shifts the focus from blame to responsibility, from persuasion to belief, and that is where trust can begin again. How trust is rebuilt slowly. When trust collapses, people often ask for a solution. Something fast, something decisive, something that makes things feel stable again. But trust doesn't return that way. It returns slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Trust is rebuilt not by grand gestures, but by small consistencies. Not by sweeping promises, but by modest commitments that are actually kept. The first step is reducing the size of promises. Large promises invite disappointment. Small promises invite verification. When expectations are realistic and fulfilled repeatedly, trust begins to thaw. The second step is predictability. People don't need excitement. They need reliability. They need to know what will happen. Tomorrow will resemble today in recognizable ways. Predictability creates safety. Safety creates openness, and openness allows trust to grow. The third step is visible accountability. Not hidden corrections, not quiet adjustments, but acknowledge mistakes and clear explanations. People forgive errors. They struggle with evasion. Ownership restores credibility. The fourth step is time. There is no substitute. Trust accumulates the way interest does. Slowly, through repetition, through consistency, across situations. This is why trust cannot be rushed. Attempts to accelerate it often signal desperation, and desperation undermines confidence. The fifth step is proximity. Trust grows faster in close relationships than in distant ones. People trust what they can observe, what they can test, what they can experience directly. This is why rebuilding trust always starts locally, in families, in communities, in workplaces, in daily interactions, not through abstract appeals, but through lived behavior. The sixth step is restraint. Doing less, saying less, promising less, and meaning it. Restraint signals seriousness. It helps people you understand the cost of it. It tells people you understand the cost of failure. And finally, trust requires patience from those who want it restored. Impatience communicates entitlement. Patience communicates respect. People who have been disappointed need time to watch before they lean in again. That watching is not hostility, it's caution. And caution deserves understanding. This is the part many people struggle with. They want trust without earning it. They want belief without consistency. But trust does not respond to pressure. It responds to proof. Quiet proof, repeated proof, over time. When people say they don't trust anything anymore, what they often mean is this. They haven't seen enough stability to risk belief again. And until they do, they will remain guarded. Not because they want to be difficult, but because experience taught them to be careful. Understanding that is the beginning of rebuilding trust. Final centering moment. Distrust does not mean you are closed. It means you have been paying attention. It means you learn from experience. And that learning deserves respect. You are not obligated to believe everything you hear. You are not required to extend trust where it has not been earned. Caution is not cynicism. Discernment is not bitterness. But neither is distrust a place to live forever. It is a place to stand while you watch, while you observe patterns, while you notice who keeps their word and who does not. Trust returns when stability returns, not through pressure, not through persuasion, but through consistency, through restraint, through honesty over time. You don't have to rush belief. You don't have to declare certainty. You are allowed to wait, to see, to let reliability relieve itself. And when trust does return, it won't arrive loudly. It will feel quiet, ordinary, uneventful. That's how you know it's real. Because real trust doesn't demand attention. It simply holds. Thank you for staying with this. God bless you. Thank you. Transforming people's lives. The Kingdom Sanctuary of Eden and Outreach Ministries. With our clothing bins all over, we're collecting clothes and shoes and giving it out to all in the communities, in the cities, and all over the world. Wherever there is a need, the Kingdom Sanctuary of Eden is there to fulfill it. Please continue all your donations, whether it be clothes, food, shoes, or monetary donations, so we can take care of God's people all over the world. The donation starts with you. Let's build the kingdom together.